What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. This is the very last regularly scheduled video before we jump into Halloween, which I'm so excited about. It will start next Thursday on the 24th of October and go to the 31st of October, which is the following Thursday. I'm so dang excited, you guys. You have absolutely no idea. So make sure you have your alarms set and ready to go. I think I'm going to be posting at about 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm considering maybe just posting in the morning. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think would be better. I'll kind of leave it up to you. Maybe I'll put a poll or something on the community tab. But aside from that, let's just go ahead and jump right into today's video. So I'm going to be talking about the disappearance of Toni Lee Sharpless. She was a 29-year-old mom and nurse that went missing from a neighborhood in Lower Merion, Pennsylvania on August 22nd, 2009. The circumstances of her disappearance could heavily be a part of struggles that she had her entire life, so as usual, I'm going to start from the beginning. Toni had lived in Pennsylvania her entire life. She grew up in a suburb right outside of Philly, but early in her childhood, at only the age of 6, she suffered a huge tragedy, which was the loss of her father unexpectedly in an accident. That is a lot to go through. At the age of 6, the entire family was kind of uprooted and their entire lifestyle was changed. Her mother, Donna, had to raise her and her sister, Candy, on her own for a while, but eventually she met a man named Peter that really recompleted the family as much as possible. He took both of the girls in as his own. Things were feeling a little bit more stable, but there were still more struggles. Toni ended up becoming pregnant and a new mom at the age of 17, which drastically changed the path of her life. But she was always the kind of person to look on the bright side of things and to be very optimistic and take charge of a situation and figure it out on her own. So she was thriving. She ended up having a little girl that she loved more than anything, and she was so dedicated to being the best mother that she could be. But her mental state soon started to decline. She started to have these periods where she would have unexplainable crying, unconsolable crying. She would cry for 1 to 3 days at a time, and she could never explain why, what she was upset about, what was going through her head. It really scared her and her family more than anything, and especially being a young mom, it really was affecting her lifestyle. And she would go to the hospital during these situations over and over again because it was such an unsettling thing to go through, but they never ever had any answers for her. It took until 2004, during one of the episodes, that she was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is a very difficult diagnosis to get, but she felt this relief that she finally at least knew what was going on. They could attempt to manage it, so she was put on medication. She was receiving different types of treatment. She was excited to move on. She thought that this would start a new chapter in her life. So in 2005, she moved in with her mom and her stepdad in Brandywine, Pennsylvania, and started to attend a local school to become a nurse, while also working a full-time job as a nursing assistant to pay off her schooling. So her mental illness was really messing with her life for a while. She wasn't going to school. She wasn't really able to work much. She was kind of drowning in it. But now she had this fresh new start and she was kicking butt. That's the best way I can describe it. She was highly intelligent and she was doing whatever she had to put herself through school. Things were looking up at this point. She graduated in 2007 with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and she immediately got a job at the infectious disease ward at Lancaster General Hospital. So she was doing great. But as things tend to go in life with the ups and the downs, and then with mental illness, things started going downhill again. She began to have manic and depressive episodes, and they were very, very extreme. Her medication just was not doing what it was supposed to be doing. This is unfortunately very common. There's so many different types of medications, so many different dosages. It takes a lot of tweaking usually to really have it work as effectively as you want it to and need it to. But because of this, she started to self-medicate, which unfortunately is another thing that often happens. She started to take different kinds of drugs. She started to drink a lot to try to numb out these issues, because her manic episodes, her family always knew when she was going into one, because she would talk and not stop talking, and she would never sleep. She was already working night shifts as a nurse at Lancaster General, so she would have that period of non-sleeping, plus she'd be so manic she couldn't sleep after leaving, so she would be up for just days at a time, which would then spiral her into a depressive episode. It was just this battle that she could not win, and it got so bad that she finally decided she wanted to go to a rehab facility. So her friend Crystal dropped her off, and she had a 3-week stay. By the time she was done with this 3-week stay and she was picked up, her family said she was back to her normal self. She was incredibly happy. She was very optimistic again. The medicine that she had been changed to seemed to work beautifully, but it came with a few stipulations that were going to be a little bit of a struggle for Toni. She couldn't drink while taking this medication, and this was something that she had become very accustomed to doing, and drinking can become an addiction, obviously, just like most things can, and she was going to have to stop. So her family knew they would have to be very, very supportive and make sure she was in the right environment to benefit her the most. They tried to make sure they didn't take her to places, and she didn't go out to places that encouraged drinking, like bars and clubs. They tried to spend her extra time doing other activities like swimming and shopping and things that didn't involve alcohol. And after 6 months, she was still doing great. She was having no more manic and depressive episodes. She had stopped drinking, so she went back to work. And this leads us to her disappearance. On the morning of August 22nd, 2009, Toni had just finished up a night shift at the hospital, but she had the next night off, and again, she was the kind of person that when she had time off, she wanted to have fun. She wouldn't go home and sleep to kind of recoup from the long night shift. She went straight into having as much fun as she possibly could. So she left straight from work to her sister Candy's house. She helped her sister clean up a little bit. She hung out with her sister's kids for a little while, and then she finally had to leave to go pick up her own daughter, and she planned to go home, get herself together, and then she was going to go shopping, I believe with her sister, Candy, and one of her old friends named Crystal. Crystal is the same person that had dropped her off at the rehab facility, or been with her at least the night that she went to the rehab facility, and they hadn't seen each other since she got out. So this was a huge and exciting moment, really, because when Toni went into the rehab facility, she was unrecognizable, essentially. So they were excited to see each other. They went, they had a blast, they did tons of shopping, but while they were shopping, Crystal got a text message from a guy named Matt Green. Now, Matt Green said he was in town and he wanted to go out that night. His brother was going to be there, Willie Green. Willie Green played for, I think, the 76ers is the name. So he was a professional basketball player, and it could be a fun night. There could be so many different opportunities, and Crystal still wanted to hang out with Toni, so she invited her along. Now, from what Crystal has said, Crystal had no idea about really the full diagnosis that Toni received. She didn't know really anything about the medication that Toni was on, the stipulations of the medication, which were you cannot drink. So when she invited Toni out, according to her, she didn't know this could be a very dangerous and harmful thing for Toni to do. And Toni agreed, so really she, from what I've seen, didn't know any better. Toni and Crystal went back to Toni's house where she lived with her parents still to kind of get their stuff together and get ready a little bit, and then at around 9:30 p.m. they headed out. Now Donna and Peter said that they were not sure about this situation, but they didn't say anything. After all, Toni's 29 years old at this point. She was still living with them to get back on her feet after, having a really big struggle, but she was an adult. She was her own person. They didn't want to try to really limit her too much. So they just told her to be safe and have fun. But they, as soon as she left, looked at each other and said, this is a really bad idea. First of all, they weren't so sure of Crystal. I guess Toni and Crystal had a falling out about a decade prior. They had been really, really close friends, but I'm assuming sometime after her daughter was born, something happened and their friendship just kind of crumbled a little bit. They also didn't like the fact that Crystal had a criminal record, I believe in 2005. I could be wrong about that date, But sometime in the past, Crystal received harassment charges. And so Crystal was just a person they didn't really trust very much. And when it came to Toni, Toni never went out to drink. Usually, when she did drink, it was kind of more of a in the house type of thing. She never went to bars, she never went to clubs. She definitely didn't enjoy going to Philly. It wasn't something she was known to ever do. And usually, when she got time off from work, she was spending that time with her daughter because she worked so much, because she worked these night shifts, would sometimes sleep during the day to prepare for another night shift. It wasn't a normal thing for her to go out and spend time doing other things. So the girls from there went to Crystal's home to finish up getting ready to go out for the night, and then they left for the clubs. They immediately went to a place called G Lounge. I think they went to two places. I cannot remember the name of one of the places, but G Lounge is kind of where the night landed. It's where it finished up. They were immediately taken to the VIP section because they were with Willie Green and Matt Green, and they started off having a few glasses of champagne, but then it went from a few glasses of champagne to dancing and having some mixed drinks, and then it went from mixed drinks to taking shots, and Toni was participating in all of this, which is a huge no-no with the medication that she was on. But she obviously might not have been in the right state of mind, and from what I've seen, no one knew to stop her. But so far, the drinking was not affecting anything. They were both having a great night. They were dancing. They met celebrities. They kept having conversations about how it was the best night they'd ever had, and they didn't want it to end. So when Willie ended up inviting them to his house in Gladwin, which is right outside of Philly, the women both agreed. When they arrived at his house, the partying continued. They played a drinking game. I think they played Taboo or something along those lines. And things ended up quickly declining after this. Now, I've seen a couple of different versions of this, and I'm not really sure why. I have seen that everyone was still inside playing and things escalated, but I've also seen that Crystal was out swimming and things escalated. Either way, something happened between Toni and someone in the party that caused Toni to become enraged. And Crystal was informed that Toni was inside screaming at people. I've seen that she poured a bottle of champagne in the middle of the floor. She was breaking things, kicking furniture. So Crystal came in to figure out what on earth was going on. When she saw Toni, she said it looked like a different person, which was bringing back memories of when Toni had to go into rehab. First of all, Toni was heavily intoxicated. Her pupils were so dilated, and Crystal couldn't figure out if maybe the alcohol had just hit really fast, or she didn't really know what was going on. Again, she didn't know about the medication or any of that. So it was scary, and she couldn't calm Toni down no matter what she did. She kept trying to figure out what was happening. I've seen that Toni was playing the game and said something that was taken as a racial slur, but it wasn't one, and it was a miscommunication, and things started happening, and Toni felt very angry because she felt like the people at the party were mocking her and making fun of her, so being accused of saying a racial slur, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and she got very, very upset. But the more Crystal tried to calm Toni down, the more violent she began to get. She was throwing furniture, she was screaming at people, she was screaming at Crystal, and finally Willie kicked them both out. Willie said, "We're not having this. This is insane. Get out." Now, Crystal knew neither one of them were in a state to drive. They were both very intoxicated, but she knew she was the more sober and stable of the two, so she tried to grab the keys, but Toni took them back and insisted on driving. Now, everyone at the party told Crystal to not get in the car with Toni, but she said, I came with her, I'm leaving with her, I have to make sure she's safe. But they only made it about 500 feet before Toni slammed on brakes and started yelling at Crystal. She said that Crystal was laughing at her just like the people in the party, and she was very, very mad at Crystal again. Again, Crystal couldn't calm her down, and eventually Toni just kicked her out of the car. Now, Crystal got out. She did, but that's because she believed Toni would kind of come to and realize that Crystal hadn't done anything. She honestly believed that Toni would either be like, you know what, I messed up, get back in the car, or she would drive off just to kind of release a little bit of anger and come back to get her. Crystal was so sure of this that she waved off the help from the people that were standing in the driveway from the party, kind of telling her to come back inside, and she grabbed her stuff and started walking in the direction that Toni had gone. Now, she walked a good while. She was hoping to head towards the highway that they had come in on, and she soon realized Toni was not coming back. She tried to call her a few times, but by the final phone call, it was clear that Toni's phone was turned off. And Crystal was now in her own state of panic because her friend had left her 40 miles away from home in a place she wasn't familiar with. Neither girls were familiar with it. There were basically no street lights. They weren't really familiar even with the people they had been with that night. It was a scary situation. So Crystal was trying to call people and finally got a family member to come and pick her up about an hour later. Now, they got kicked out of the house sometime between 4 and 5 a.m. I think it was closer to 5 a.m. Crystal was picked up closer to about 6 a.m. Now, on the drive back home, Crystal decided to call Candy and just let her know that there had been an issue with Toni the night before. Candy didn't see any of these calls until she woke up that following morning, and she knew something was not right. So she decided to call her parents to see if Toni was okay, make sure she made it home safe, but Toni had never come home. Everyone was terrified because between the events of that night, her diagnosis, her medication, the level of alcohol she had consumed, there was absolutely no telling what happened to her. And she drove off with about a quarter tank of gas, so she did not have a lot of gas. She would not have made it all the way home off the gas that she had. And she was driving in a dark, unfamiliar area. It was not the setup for a great outcome. To top it off, she had been awake at this point for over 36 hours, which typically led to horrible issues with her mental health. Now, they decided because of this, she likely could have been arrested for a DUI, or she might have been in some sort of accident, whether it was from her being intoxicated or the lack of knowledge of where she was or the lighting. So they decided their first step was going to be to call the local hospitals and call the local jails to see if she was located in any of these places. But after calling multiple different establishments, she wasn't anywhere. Her family continued to try to text and call her, but they received absolutely no response. So Crystal finally called the police department to try to report Toni as missing. Now, the police department gave Crystal some issues. I am not fully aware of what happened, but from the way it was explained by Crystal, the police department basically told her, family is typically the one to report someone is missing. So I think there was kind of this roadblock happening, and Toni's family wasn't quite ready to really report her as missing. I know a lot of people tend to get weird about that, but you have to understand that's kind of like a finalization that something's wrong, and a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that. It scares them. So that can often stop families from reporting someone missing as soon as possible. And they also didn't want to upset Toni by creating this false alarm if she had just pulled over and decided to sleep for a little bit. So it took a little bit of convincing, but Candy finally was like, you know what, better safe than sorry, and she went down to the station and reported her sister as missing. Now, authorities were not exactly sure at this point what they were looking at. The family swore up and down it had to be some sort of accident, or, she was asleep somewhere, or something happened to her, like someone took her foul play. But police were considering another option that the family was very dismissive about. Toni had a history of suicide attempts. That's something that oftentimes goes hand in hand with bipolar, any sort of depression, any sort of manic episode. So they were worried that because of the events of that night and the state of anger that she left in, that she might have snapped and ended her own life. She clearly was very upset and distressed when she left. But her family said that despite all of those different attempts that she had, she'd done so well over the past few years. Yes, her medication stopped working for a little bit, and she did spiral into really bad manic and depressive episodes, but in that current time, her current medication was working great. She had had no issues with it. She had had no episodes, manic or depressive. She was doing great. She loved her job. She loved her family. She loved her daughter. She had worked so hard to be where she was, despite the fact that she was a young mom, despite the fact that she had bipolar disorder, despite the fact that she had to pay her own way through college and do all these things. She kicked butt. She did what she had to do and worked way too hard to end her life. And that was the family's stance on that. She would not have given all of that up. Authorities obviously respect what they had to say, but they still had to keep that in the back of their mind. But they also did consider other possibilities of what could have happened to Toni, and they started to make moves to hopefully locate her if she was still out there somewhere. They put out a bolo for her car. She drove a black Pontiac 2002 Grand Prix GT with the license plate DND 777. Basically, this would make it so that if her car passed any police car with a scanner on it, or if it was picked up for a DUI, or anyone pulled her over just in general, or even if it was towed, authorities would immediately be alerted. But right off the bat, they had no hits, meaning Toni's car had not been picked up in any way, shape, or form up until that point. They also decided to check her cell phone to see if maybe they could locate her that way, if she was still using it. But unfortunately, this really didn't give them any answers either. The last time Toni's phone sent a ping off a tower was at 4:53 a.m., so almost the exact time she left the house party. And based on the location being in Lower Merion, where this tower was located, that basically ended up just being her leaving the party. Now, the last text she sent was at 2:57 a.m. And I've seen two different stories of this, so I want to lay them both out there. Basically, the last text she ever sent was to her daughter. Her daughter was not able to sleep at the time because her mom was out and she wanted her mom to be home. So she had texted Toni, and Toni basically said, "I'll be home soon, get some sleep, I love you." But again, I've seen an officer state this was at 2:57. I've seen her mom state it was around 4 a.m. Or 5 a.m. So I am not really sure, but I want to give you both of those. Now, either way, this didn't help any. This was kind of information they already knew, and from that moment on, her phone appeared to be off and had no more hits. So they decided to also check her bank statement, her different cards, things like that, because again, she only had about a quarter tank of gas. She wouldn't have made it home or pretty much anywhere without needing to stop at a gas station, but there was absolutely no activity. I'm unaware if she had any cash on her at the time. I just know that she never stopped for gas, meaning there was only so far she could have been after leaving the house in Lower Merion. Donna and Peter decided to take things into their own hands. They are some amazing freaking parents, you guys. They thought of some of the best ways to search for Toni. They decided to drive around the roads where she was last known to be. And they wondered, there's still no way to fully rule out that Toni wasn't in an accident. What if she had driven off the side of the road, it was dark, there wasn't much lighting, and she's just in a location where nobody has found her yet? So they drove everywhere. They looked for things like hits on a side guardrail. They looked for things like tire marks on the road. They even were looking for broken tree branches on the side of the road. They looked down every embankment. They had an entire map out, and they were checking every possible place, leaving no stone unturned. But unfortunately, they didn't manage to find anything, but they weren't giving up because they were still so convinced it was so likely she was still in that area. So they came up with this freaking brilliant idea. They looked at the map and they noticed that there was basically only one way leaving the neighborhood from this house to get on the highway. And the first exit you would have to take to get back onto the highway was only an eastbound exit. So that would have been leading her towards Philly and in the wrong direction. She would need to go the opposite way back to her parents' house in Brandywine where she lived. Now, she would have had to go to a completely different exit to start heading the right direction, but there was also another road she could have mistaken for an exit, and that road led straight to a boat ramp. Now, it was a huge possibility that either she A, got onto the wrong eastbound ramp and was heading straight towards Philly and ran out of gas going that direction. B, she tried to turn down what she thought was the next exit, which would have been the road straight to the boat ramp. At that point in time, road, water looks exactly the same. You know where I'm going with that. So they decided to take this idea to police, and police thought it was a brilliant theory. So the boat ramp itself was in a residential area, but it was kind of isolated enough to where no one would have seen or heard if a car had gone into the water. And it wasn't lit. It would have been a perfect place for some sort of accident like this to occur. So to top it off, probably like things straight from my nightmares, this is like a big phobia of mine. The water right off of the boat ramp, dropped 25 feet. This is actually what my nightmares consist of, this portion I'm about to tell you. I've literally had nightmares about it so far just from researching this. But basically, it would have been a huge search. If her car had driven off that ramp, it would have not immediately, but pretty quickly plummeted down 25 feet to the bottom of this river, the Schuylkill River, and no one would have known anything. It really would leave pretty much no trace behind. So they decided to send officers out there, and before bringing out an entire dive team, which costs a lot of money and takes a lot of effort, they needed to get some sort of evidence that it could have happened, some sort of proof, but unfortunately, they found nothing, so they decided it was not worth taking the time to search the river. Now, thankfully, there are organizations like Texas EquiSearch and I think one or two other local organizations that were nonprofit. They come and they do searches just to genuinely help families out, and they decided to do sonar on the river themselves. It's very basic sonar equipment. It's not like the craziest you can get. They would still be able to figure out if there was something that even looked like a car down on the bottom. So basically, a boat just kind of drives over certain parts of the river, scans everything, and sure enough, and I literally am having a hard time getting this out because my phobia is so bad, but there were 3 cars in the bottom of this river. 3 cars. So this obviously was enough to get authorities to come in with better equipment and do another search. They wanted to send divers down there because at this point, huge possibility confirmed, but they wanted to get a better idea of what they were going down to because again, it was 25 feet deep. That's pretty deep. So with their equipment, it was not just 3 cars, there were 11 cars in the bottom of this river. So essentially, it was such a perfect setup for either huge accidents to happen, which there have been since all this. I think just last year or even this year, there was an accident where someone ran off the boat ramp. But it's also a great place for people to dump cars. It was just terrifying. 11 cars down in this river. So they decided to go down and search with divers, but it was going to take a while because they had to get down 25 feet. They had to find identifying characteristics of the car. If there was still a tag on it, they had to take the tag off and bring it up so police could figure out who the vehicle belonged to. And it was a huge operation. Her sister was there kind of waiting on pins and needles to find out if one of these cars was in fact Toni's. All but 2 cars were found to probably not be Toni's. So they decided they needed to just pull all of these cars out of the river, which is another huge task. There's water in these cars. The cars themselves are heavy, pulling up against the pressure of the water on top of them. It was a lot. They were only able to pull up 9 cars in total, I believe, and none of them belonged to Toni. But then on September 14th, 2009, authorities from Camden, New Jersey, right over the river, like right across from Philly, called the local police department and said they had information on Toni. On September 8th, so just a few weeks after Toni disappeared and about a week before authorities contacted the local police department, one of the Camden police cars had recorded Toni's car driving by on their tag reader. Now, the area itself that her car was spotted in was only 20 minutes away from the last place she had been seen, but it was also recorded about 2 or so weeks later. So what's so frustrating about this is that if there's a tag reader on an officer's car and there is a tag that's been flagged, the second that tag reader picks it up, alarms go off in the car that indicates either it's a stolen car, belongs to a missing person, all sorts of things, and authorities can then pull that person over, pull the car over, figure out what's going on. But of course, with the way things go, this just so happened to be an unmanned vehicle at the time. So based on the information they had, they just knew her car had driven by, but they didn't know if it was her in the car. They didn't know if, she could have maybe been hidden in the trunk at this point, or if maybe someone had stolen the vehicle. But all they knew is that her vehicle was moving around in Camden, New Jersey. Now, Camden itself is not a good place, and the second her family heard this, they knew she would not willingly be in this area. It is known for drugs and sex work, majority of that sex work being forced sex work by pimps. It's just a very unsafe place. Toni had actually gone there recently with her sister Candy to go to a concert, and the entire time Toni spoke about how she wanted to leave and go home because she did not like the area. Now, authorities, however, also saw this from a different perspective, the fact that Camden is riddled with drugs, particularly, I believe, heroin, and Toni had an issue with drugs in the past, though she hadn't had any drug use that her family knew of since she started going to school for nursing, which was a while before this. Relapses happen, and they considered the fact that maybe she left this party upset, she wanted to score something to get her mind off of everything. She ended up in Camden. It was nearby. There's no telling. Authorities decided to go ahead and check the local area as much as they could to see if they could find her car again after this, but there was nothing. Now, this is when a woman named Eileen Law, a private investigator, came into the picture. She ended up hearing about Toni's disappearance on the TV, and she said she immediately stood up and said, "This woman's alive." She had a completely other theory that no one had really thought of yet. So, a man in the area named Alan Brown Jr. had recently been arrested for prostituting women. He would go and scope out different places like bus stops, just any random street corner, gas stations. He would find very vulnerable women, convince them to come with him, and then he would end up beating them, drugging them, and forcing sex work on them. Now, he had just been arrested for this in this area, and she believed it was a huge possibility he was not the only one doing these kinds of things. We know that this is actually a lot more common than anyone really wants to admit. So she believed it's very possible Toni had ran out of gas at some point, possibly in the Philly area right across from Camden. This would have put her in a vulnerable spot. She could have been approached by the wrong person who took advantage of her and then threw her into sex work. She decided to offer her help to find Toni pro bono, which is absolutely amazing. I believe that Donna actually gave her $1 to make their work legal, so technically she was paying for it, but she only gave her $1. And Eileen worked her butt off. She decided the very first step was to put Toni's face all over the media, and this brought in a flood of sightings. Many of the sightings were from Lancaster, right by Lancaster General, which is somewhere she worked, and every single person that called in these sightings described essentially the same thing. A woman that looked exactly like Toni, and she was very, very distressed. One particular sighting was of a man on a bus that saw someone that he was so sure looked like Toni that he almost asked the bus driver to stop so he could run off and go and get her. But almost as soon as these calls started, after about a week, they stopped and everything went silent again. But then they started getting more phone calls of sightings in Camden, New Jersey. The same types of things were being described. A lot of these sightings was seeing her with another man that seemed to be kind of pushing her around. And then after a week or so, these sightings stopped and it went quiet for another week. But then it picked right back up again in Philly. Same exact thing. Now, because of this, there was huge speculation that she was being moved around and just kind of put more fire to Eileen's theory. But unfortunately, by the time they were able to start searches and looking for things, she likely had been moved to another area. Now we get on to the theories in this case, and I don't believe police have come forward and stated they believe in one theory in specific. I know Eileen really believes there is some sort of trafficking happening, sex trafficking, or just enslavement by a pimp and forced sex work, but I am really caught up with the car. So many people believe that because the car was seen, that indicates that she was in the car. There is absolutely zero proof of that. Let's take the idea that she was driving and ran out of gas on the side of the road and A and B happened. So a few things could have happened. She could have walked away from the car, been seen vulnerable, drunk, walking on the side of the road, and could have been grabbed and taken elsewhere. And then maybe someone else saw this car abandoned and decided to steal it, but that would take a lot of work. At this point, again, she would have been out of gas. They would have had to go get gas, fill the car up a little bit, drive it to a public place, put more gas into it, and then keep on driving. But one thing that bothers me about the idea that this car was stolen was the fact that the plates were kept on it. most criminals will be smart enough to take the plates off so it's not identifiable. So whatever happened to her and whatever happened to her car, it could be two completely different unrelated things. Or there's a possibility that she did have cash on her. She was able to stop and maybe something happened after she managed to get gas. I have absolutely no idea, you guys. The different ideas just surrounding the car in general could just keep on going. So now I want to talk about the theory that she could have been put into forced sex work. She was a prime target. She's just a prime target in general, unfortunately, because these people that enslave women and men into sex work, they are looking for someone very unstable, very easily persuaded, someone that might be heavily intoxicated, someone that might currently be on drugs, someone that will accept drugs if they're offered. She was in such a vulnerable state emotionally and mentally at that moment in time. She was upset. She just felt like she was being mocked, made fun of. She drank for the first time in forever. It was reacting with her medication. It would have been very easy to subdue her had someone come in contact with her. And then the fact that it really does seem like she was being moved around. All of these sightings were very, very possible. I don't know if any were even confirmed, but the fact that callers said the same things about the same description of a woman in the same areas, it's huge. And in 2011, there was a dancer that worked in Philly that even came forward to Eileen and claimed to have met Toni in one of these situations. And she was able to accurately describe Toni down to stretch marks that she had. So this makes it that much more possible that she was forced into this kind of environment. But the one thing that worries me about this is that she was very highly publicized. This ended up being huge. We've got a professional NBA player as one of the last people to be with her. That's going to blow up. She was on Nancy Grace. That's going to blow up. It's very likely, if it was so highly publicized, these people that could have been moving her around didn't want to risk what they were risking having such a high profile missing person on their hands, and they might have just wanted to get rid of her. Another thing to me that scares me is that the sightings kind of stopped. It could just be from lack of exposure. People don't know. People didn't know to call in. The media kind of quieted down about it, or they stopped because something had been done to her. Now, another theory that's floating around online and within the family themselves is that some people believe something happened at the party that night, that everything we're seeing afterwards is just coincidences and not actually a part of this case, and everything that did happen to Toni happened within Lower Merion. Now, I understand where this is coming from. It's typical to look at the last people that were with someone that goes missing. But I don't think there's really any evidence to prove it. Both Willie Green and Crystal have been very cooperative and ruled out in these cases from what I know. Everyone that's spoken to Crystal says that she was telling the truth. Seems to be no professional that's spoken with her that thinks that she's lying or hiding something at all. She went in and asked to be given a polygraph test because she was so sick from what she was seeing online when it came to accusations against her being involved that she really wanted to clear the air immediately. I mean, she was dropped in on multiple times unaware that she was being dropped in on, and then was forced to sit through like 3-hour interrogations within her own home. She never changed her story. She never said anything odd. Everything matched up. They were able to check her phone records and see that she really had tried to call Toni at the time she said she did. So there was this speculation, but so far authorities and professionals say, no, it's fine. But Toni's mother believes there's something going on with it. She still doesn't feel like she's getting the whole truth from Crystal. A lot of Toni's nursing friends believe the same thing. They said they get a bad vibe from Crystal, and they just believe something more is going on. Now, I don't know what the claims are. I don't know what people believe happened within the home. I don't know what they believe Crystal or Willie may have done or any of that. I just know there are a lot of people that are still questioning them to this day. There was also something really strange that happened in 2012 that people won't really let go of. A letter was sent into the PI that had some really big claims in it. Now, the person said in this letter, it was written on yellow legal paper, that they were paid $5,000 to get rid of a car they believed to be a stolen car. They were supposed to take it from Camden to Boston, and this was right around the time that Toni went missing. But they said that when they got back, they were told that it was actually not a stolen car, but a missing person's car. And that missing person was not just missing, they were dead. So according to the story, Toni apparently got into an argument with a police officer, and this police officer ended up killing her and then needed to dispose of the vehicle. They tried to cover it up. They had the right contacts. So this person drove the car to Boston, dropped it off, wrote down the VIN number, and then that was that. This person even gave the VIN number in this letter, and it did match the VIN number on Toni's car. But authorities said that they believed it was a prank. But the PI and the family believes there's definitely something more to this. I think this is hugely possible, honestly. Let's say she did end up getting pulled over, or maybe a police officer stopped to help her on the side of the road after she ran out of gas. She was very combative towards pretty much everyone, and had there been some sort of argument between them, even if it was accidental, if the officer didn't intend to hurt her, I can totally see this as a possibility. Crazier things happen, I'll just say that. At this point, her mother at least does not believe she is alive any longer, but there are definitely people out there that believe she could still be in a trafficking type of situation. At this point, her daughter is only a couple years younger than me, and she's growing up without her mother. You know, someone that she relied on, the one main person in her life. But not a single person is giving up on this case. Eileen still posts. Donna still posts. They try so hard to keep Toni's face out there because, as I always say, and I always get yelled at for because it's cliche, but it's the dang truth, someone knows something. Someone knows what happened to her that night. Someone knows where the car is. It's unusual for a car to not be found this long after this happened. This car was disposed of. That's the only thing that I can think of, which just screams foul play. Something happened, which means someone or a group of people have the information that we need to locate Toni, whether dead or alive. And either way, that closure is insanely important to her family. A lot of people see these cases and again write them off once they create this idea that they believe this person's no longer alive, and they see that as their closure and move on as if that's all the family needs to keep going in life. And that's just not the truth. These cases are so important to keep out there. We don't know the outcome. Nothing is set in stone. It's never safe to assume, but it's always safe to keep pushing out the information, keep people aware that this person's missing and these are the circumstances. I have all of the information down below to different authorities that you can contact. There's also a website that I have listing down below. It's Toni's actual website, and you can report a tip straight there. It explains the process. You can stay anonymous. So if you have information, please, please, please contact someone. They are still trying to figure out where the heck this car is. If you lived in the Camden area or the Philly area or anywhere in this area at the time of Toni's disappearance, and you randomly saw someone have a Pontiac Grand Prix GT pull up in their driveway and stay there for a while or anything like that, there's just no telling. It could still be out there. It could be hiding in someone's garage. It could be at a junkyard. Keep your eye out. It could lead to answers in Toni's disappearance. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Toni's story. Please keep her family, especially her daughter, in your thoughts. I cannot imagine what she's dealing with still to this day. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Howlin' fam, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.